Hey guys, Joan Ribs coming at you with another Spire chat. Today I wanted to mix it up and talk about a relic instead of a card. So I wanted to chat about Pendib, a common relic. This can be picked up by Ironclad or Silent. You can get it from the whale, from a store. It'll cost you about 150 gold or something. From an elite, from a treasure chest, all sorts of ways that you can end up with a Pendib in your deck. It happens, with some regularity. Looking at it, I seem to get this in about 25% of my runs or so, looks like. Around about maybe 30% of my runs even. So common relics do come up fairly frequently for me. And how often you'll get it depends on like how far you're getting on average, I guess, and how highly you're prioritizing elites and buying relics from swords and stuff. And, I value Pendib fairly highly. I can't say that I know abstractly exactly how good this relic is, but looking just numerically, it's a little bit higher win rate than an average relic, which, considering that this is common, I'd say is, it's pretty strong for a common relic. It's a little bit less impactful than Vajra is in my runs. It has a slightly lower win rate than Vajra does, especially for Ironclad. Vajra seems to be doing quite a bit better than Pendib, but it's good value. And Vajra is another common relic, which just gives you +1 strength, so another way to increase your damage output. So Pendib, obviously, at worst, you'd expect that this would give you an extra 10% damage. Every 10th attack you play deals double damage, so instead of dealing 10 damage with 10 attacks, you now deal 11 damage with 10 attacks, 10% damage increase. The interesting thing about Pendib is working out how you can get that bonus to be as large as possible for you. If you play 9 fairly low damage attacks and then 1 really huge high damage attack, then the Pendib bonus is going to be considerably more relevant. So if you're playing like 9 attacks and then a finisher on a turn, your Pendib is incredible. I just wanted to talk a little bit about, what sort of interactions I'm looking for with Pendib. Just have some fun looking at some stuff. So, on Ironclad, the really, really, really cool interaction with Pendib, I think, is Whirlwind, probably. Whirlwind is an X-cost card, which means that you can potentially dump a ton of energy into this. And it's true with Silent, with Skewer as well, but if you set up a Pendib with a large Whirlwind, you can do a ton of damage. One of the really crucial things to making this absolutely insane is Ice Cream. It's a rare relic which lets you carry your energy over from turn to turn. So if you're in a boss fight, basically, conceptually, what you do is you just play enough blocks to stay alive. You play attacks up until you have Pendib ready, and then you just let your energy accumulate and play Whirlwind. It deals double damage. X is 15 or whatever. And all of a sudden the boss is just straight up dead. So Pendib in a situation like that is, almost accounting for half of your damage in the entire fight. It's a very, very significant damage upgrade, increase. Other than that, Ironclad, I think, struggles to make really good use of Pendib because Ironclad tends to have attacks which all deal around the same amount of damage, or when they do have attacks that deal a lot of damage, like something like Heavy Blade deals extra damage with strength. Stuff like Sword Boomerang also scales very well with strength because it's dealing damage numerous times. Twin Strike is another one that does okay with strength scaling. A lot of these cards just sort of scale a ton with strength. I guess Body Slam is another one that we could point out. If you set up a Pendib Body Slam and burst 100, 200 block, that can win a lot of fights for you. So there are some really cool ways to employ Pendib to do crazy things. I'd say the Barricade plus Body Slam interaction is really good, and the Whirlwind plus Ice Cream interaction really good. But in general, I don't think that Pendib is that crazy strong on Ironclad, just because you can just scale off strength. Like, you can just make all of your attacks deal truckloads of damage. And when the other 9 attacks you're playing deal a truckload of damage anyway, the fact that your 10th attack deals double damage does not matter anywhere near as much. So I'd say that Pen it's an okay relic in Ironclad, but it does significantly worse than Vajra in Ironclad for me and my sample. And I think that makes sense. I think it's because Ironclad tends to play, you know, a moderate number of high impact attacks over the course of a fight, thanks to strength scaling usually. And the only places that Pen really go insane are in a Whirlwind plus Ice Cream sort of situation, or a Body Slam plus temporary block output situation. Because it's weird. If you Body Slam, like if you get Barricade in play and create a ton of block, you don't really need Pen Nib. For Pen Nib to matter in that situation, you need to have your block be temporary, so it has to be coming from something like Corruption plus Feel No Pain. Feel No Pain, you're getting a bunch of block when you exhaust cards. Corruption's letting you exhaust them all. It's a very narrow window, basically, where Pen Nib is really strong in that situation. Where I think Pen Nib has a bit more in the way of exciting implementation is in Silent. And the most obvious implementation is Skewer, potentially with Ice Cream, or with something like Doppelganger. Carry your energy over until next turn. Something like Outmaneuver, Adrenaline to create energy. There are quite a few ways for Silent to play a very large Skewer, and that can deal a ton. And there's also Phantasmal Killer for Silent. On your next turn, your attack damage is doubled, and this scales multiplicatively with Pen Nib. So you're doubling your damage, and then you're doubling it again with Pen Nib for an overall 4 times damage on some big attack like Skewer. Silent also deals less damage with their other attacks than Ironclad because strength scaling is less readily available. There are ways to scale strength on Silent, typically with relics or potions, but like typically your shivs are going to be dealing 4, maybe 5 or 6. If you have like 1 accuracy in play, maybe they'll deal 7. But still, that's a lot less than like your strikes dealing 15 on Ironclad when you have 9 strength. So Silent's better at playing a large number of attacks, and then Silent also has more candidates for 1 very high damage attack for them to end up on. The big ones are Finisher. This goes in a deck with like Infinite Blades and Cloak and Daggers. You play a lot of attacks in a turn, and then you play Finisher. And a lot of the ways that you can deal a lot of attacks in a turn are pretty low impact on the Silent's overall deck construction. Infinite Blades is a power, which gets out of your deck once you play it, and so as the fight goes on, you don't have to worry about drawing it over and over again. Cloak and Dagger, of course, gains block for you, so that's a block card, which is making you a ton of incidental attacks. There's also stuff like Quick Slash, which draws you a card when played, and Blade Dance gets you lots of attacks on 1 card. Just in general, Finisher tends to be quite strong on Silent, and Pen Nib is excellent with Finisher on Silent. Pen Nib creates very interesting situations with Finisher because Finisher has to be played at a certain point in a turn. So you want to start setting this up 1 or even 2 turns in advance. You want to like end a turn with Pen Nib at 4 or something so that you can play 5 attacks and then Finisher on the next turn. And if you're looking at what's in your draw pile and seeing that, you know, there are only 7 cards left in your draw pile or something, and one of them's Finisher, you can start to craft your strategy around getting that Finisher off on the right turn. It can be very satisfying to do and very powerful when you pull it off. Finisher upgraded deals 8 damage for each attack played this turn, and in general, I think Finisher's a strong card and something that's well worth trying to build a damage engine around. Fléchettes is another one. Fléchettes deals 4 or 6 damage for each skill in your hand. I don't understand why Fléchettes deals so much less damage than Finisher. Like 4-6 versus 6-8. I just don't understand. I think honestly it's easier for Silent to play attacks in a turn than it is for Silent to have a ton of skills in hand. So that just sort of perplexes me. Because it deals less damage, Fléchettes is just generally not as strong, in my opinion. And the decks that Fléchettes goes in tend to be less easy to put together just because if you're having to have a ton of skill density, your deck is going to have trouble killing stuff at the start of fights. Fléchettes is sort of a card that's only good if you're drawing too many cards. But drawing too many cards is a bad thing to do in a deck. Conceptually, you don't want to draw a ton of cards if you can't afford to play them all anyway. Like, why would you do that? What's the point of having drawn all the cards if you can't play them? There are some benefits, but conceptually, you generally do better if you're drawing about as many cards as you're playing, just because it's a more efficient mode of playing the game. And so, yeah, Fléchettes is like, it's another thing that I'm looking for with Pen Nib, but it's generally not as strong as Finisher in my experience. And then the other one is Skewer, which we can say all the same things that I said about Whirlwind about Skewer. Skewer I actually value more highly on Silent than I value Whirlwind on Ironclad. Silent, I think, has a little bit more difficulty converting their energy into attack on important turns, and so having an X card, which lets you dump all of your energy into attack on a turn where you should be attacking, can be very valuable to Silent. And the reason for that is that there are just a lot of Silent commons like Backflip, which do not attack. Cloak and Dagger does attack, but it gains you 6 block as well. It's very inefficient as a source of attack. And meanwhile, Ironclad has a bunch of common 2 energy cost attacks, like Clothesline and Bash. These are cards that I think are quite good. And that means that if you're drawing those, you don't really even need to draw a ton of other attacks to be able to convert all of your energy into attacks for a turn. So, I find that with Silent, it's more difficult to convert all of my energy into attacks on a turn where I want to, and as such, Skewer is a very valuable card to have, a very valuable option to have a lot of the time. So generally I love Skewer. The fact that you don't really need anything else to be going on with Skewer for it to be an excellent Pen Nib target is great. You don't need a ton of skills in hand like you do with Fléchettes. You don't need to play another bunch of attacks in the turn and have them line up perfectly so that you can Pen Nib after them like you do with Finisher. Yeah, so Skewer is really nice, and Skewer is really simple to set up with something like Phantasmal Killer to double its damage on your next turn. All you need to do is have a well-laid plans, or even if you don't have a well-laid plans, often like something like a Doppelganger is enough. If you Phantasmal Killer and Doppelganger for 2, you're going to be drawing 7 cards the next turn, and you'll probably have like 6 or 7 energy. So if your deck is like has 10 cards remaining in it and one of them Skewer, you're probably going to be able to hit, especially if you have something like a Backflip to draw you another 2 cards if you miss it in the actual first 7 cards that you draw. And then, you know, once you've got this Doppelganger Skewer going, if you play it for 6, assuming it's upgraded, even if you don't have any strength, that's 60 damage times 2 for the Phantasmal Killer is 120, times 2 for the Pen Nib is 240. So you're talking about, you're talking about damage amounts which come close to one-shotting bosses without really doing much at all. Sure, we use 2 rares to do this. We use Doppelganger and Phantasmal Killer. But those are both just like generally good cards which are likely to be in your deck, and then Skewer is a very good card. So that's a way that Pen Nib can really do very strong things for you, and something that I think you should be watching out for. All right. So yeah, Pen Nib's interesting because as a relic, I can't really say like you should take this very highly, because most of the time that you get it, it's just from an elite fight or from a chest, and obviously you're going to take it because why wouldn't you take it? I do buy it in stores quite regularly when I see it. I think it's a fairly good investment of money. And yeah, the downside of Pen Nib is that I'm pretty sure the relic exists solely to make you feel stupid. Because, I lost in Ascension 15 today because I played Pen Nib wrong and just used it on the wrong attack in my turn against the Awakened one, and then she ended up with 8 hit points. Whoops. Pen Nib definitely makes you think, and keep in mind that if you have a Pen Nib, you may want to play in ways that don't seem right if you didn't have a pen nib. Like, you may want to delay the end of a fight so that your pen nib is closer to going off in the next fight. Or you may want to, you know, just use poison to end a fight so that your pen nib is actually ready to go off with the first attack in the next fight, or something like that. You may not want to play attacks this turn. Like, you might want to just pass the turn with a strike in hand and 1 energy, so that next turn you have pen nib for a more impactful attack. You want to be thinking about stuff like that, and because of all that, pen nib's, I think, a really fun relic to play with. It can be frustrating when you get it wrong, especially if you lose because you got it wrong, but it's a very nuanced and interesting relic, and I wanted to chat about it with you. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you thought. I know mostly I do cards, but I do want to talk about relics and maybe even enemies as well. If you have any relics or enemies that you think would be really interesting to talk about, let me know. I've been Joe on Ribs. Check out the links to the Discord and Twitch stream and stuff like that below the video, and I hope you have an awesome day. Bye, guys.